Hi, my name's Anna Cordes. I am a ranger naturalist here at Kings Canyon National Park. We are standing over Redwood Canyon, which contains one of the largest groves of giant sequoias in the world, Redwood Mountain Grove. Now don't let the name fool you, these are not redwoods, these are giant sequoias. In the old days they used to call them Sierra redwoods, and the name stuck. Now fossil evidence shows that giant sequoias used to live in many other areas, but they've been pushed back to the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Biologically, giant sequoias are not hugely different than other conifers in these mountains. There are 3 other trees that get as old, many other trees reach their largest sizes in the Sierras, and many other plants and animals are as rare. Yet no other tree inspires such a strong emotional response in us. Maybe it's because we mistakenly view them as changeless and ageless, an almost sacred object. In fact, giant sequoias are a successful member of a community of plants and animals that together make up the mixed conifer forest in the Sierra Nevada. But to understand giant sequoias, you first have to understand the community that makes up their home. Before we begin our hike, just look at this beautiful forest, and you'll notice that there are lots of different kinds of trees here. On any place on this trail, you will probably see 3 different other kinds of trees that together make up a sequoia grove. When you're walking through a sequoia grove, it's easy to miss the forest for the trees, and that's literally what the parks did for many years. In 1890, these parks were formed specifically to protect giant sequoias. Now at first, caretakers thought that protecting these trees meant just protecting individual trees as museum specimens. But it took them many years to figure out that to protect these trees, you have to protect the entire forest. And surprisingly, to protect the forest, you have to preserve the role that fire plays in this ecosystem. Giant sequoias go through definite stages during their growth. They go from seedlings to saplings to spire tops to mature trees, and finally to the giant monarchs. Now, in a healthy sequoia grove, you should see all of these life stages. However, in this grove, you see just a scattering of mature trees. Why do you think that is? The first caretakers focused on what they thought were the main threats to giant sequoias, which were logging and fire. But after putting out all the fires and chasing away all the loggers, they noticed that there were no young sequoias. Why are there no babies? Well, one of the clues is the richness of the understory around us. The other clue is the unblemished bark of the giant sequoias. We come to a junction and we take the left trail, the Heart Tree Trail, and we're going to look for clues about the missing baby sequoias. Giant sequoias are perhaps one of the most misunderstood trees. It's only after many years of field work have researchers started to unfold the complex and fascinating story of giant sequoia regeneration and growth. Some plants are generalists, like this sugar pine. Some plants are specialists, like those giant sequoias. Specialists can only grow in specific places, but when the conditions are right, they thrive in those places. Sequoias are such picky specialists that you could call them the Goldilocks of trees. Most trees either like full sun and they're drought tolerant, or they like a lot of water and they're shade tolerant. But giant sequoias are the oddballs. They like both sun and water. Like all newborns, giant sequoia babies face many threats, from fire to insects to shading, competition from other plants, just to name a few. But sequoias have developed unique adaptations to dominate areas that have perfect conditions, just like this. Giant sequoias are well adapted to the low-intensity fires that used to come naturally through this forest. Most conifers will release their annual production of seeds once a year, regardless of whether or not the conditions for germination are correct. Giant sequoias, on the other hand, will hang onto their cones for years until a fire far below causes heat to rise, dries out the cones, the seeds fall out onto the perfect ground below. Fire naturally moves through these groves, and when fire comes through, it burns off the duff, reduces competition, opens the canopy, allowing the young seedlings to race for the sun. And as they get older, they'll drop their lower branches and grow thick, fire-resistant bark. It's estimated that 1 in a million seeds will germinate, and 1 in a billion of those seedlings will become mature trees. But when they become mature trees, they are kings of the forest. Their huge size, massive girth, and towering crowns give giant sequoias a key advantage over the competition in these forests. They're also resistant to insects and decay. In fact, the #1 way giant sequoias die is by falling over. Today we come to these special places to reconnect with nature, but early settlers just saw this as another place to make a living. This hollowed out log was once home to some loggers. Can you imagine what these settlers must have thought when they saw all the wood in a single giant sequoia tree? Giant sequoia wood is actually not good lumber at all. The wood is very brittle, and when the tree falls down, it shatters into little pieces. So most giant sequoias ended up as grape stakes, fence posts, even matchsticks. By the time Redwood Canyon became part of the park in 1940, the forest was already under distress. The lack of low-intensity burns led to a huge buildup of dead plant material and live plant material on the forest floor. Heat and smoke were no longer rising to dry out the cones, allowing the seeds to fall down. When the seeds did fall, if they fell, they couldn't take root because there was so much debris on the ground. Those that did manage to take root were unable to get through the canopy. So for a sun-loving giant sequoia, that meant stunted death. The result was a gradual change in the composition of the forest. Shade-loving trees like the white fir began to crowd out giant sequoias. Only the mature sequoias that already had their canopies above the white fir canopy were able to thrive in this altered state. Here we are entering one of the most stunning areas of this massive grove. We can walk through the stillness of the forest for more than a mile under hundreds of giants. The trail even goes through the trunk of a fallen monarch. The abundant year-round water that makes these places wonderful for giant sequoias also makes it a great place for other plants and animals. Giant sequoia groves are home to a startling variety of life. For example, you will see this green hair-like structures growing on the trees. This is actually a lichen, a close partnership between an algae and a fungus. Some animals are actually helpful to sequoias in their reproduction. The chicory, for instance, is the little acrobatic squirrel that runs up and down the sequoia trees. Maybe you saw one. They eat the green cone scales, and they can turn a nice green cone into something like this in no time. But if you're under a sequoia tree with a chicory in it, you should get a hard hat. Mature sequoias can reach well over 200 feet tall, but amazingly, their roots rarely push deeper than 5 feet. So when you combine that with their heavy crowns, snow loads in the winter, fierce winds, it's a combination for these giants toppling over. Look how massive this giant sequoia is. And now we're going to walk across this log about 12 feet above the creek so we won't get our feet wet. So here we are at a junction in the trail. Go left and you'll go 3 miles to Big Springs. Take a right and you go 1/10 of a mile to the Sugar Bowl Trail. So we come to our next trail junction, to the second half of our loop, the Sugar Bowl Loop. Come along. This giant sequoia behind me has been measured at 307 feet. That's only 4 feet shorter than the tallest giant sequoia ever accurately measured, and that's also in this grove. This is one of the areas where important research took place in the 1960s on how fire affects sequoia regeneration. Researchers carefully marked off little plots and burned them. They compared how well the baby sequoias did in these burned plots compared with unburned plots. Scientists wondered how much heat sequoia seeds could take. They pushed together piles of brush, and to their surprise, the hotter burns led to thicker and more vigorous stands of baby sequoias. They learned that sequoia seeds need fires that burn the ground to bare mineral soil and torch occasionally to open the canopy. Burning the bare soil allows the tiny seeds to push roots into the soil before running out of energy. Opening up the canopy allows the seedlings to race for the sun before shade-tolerant competitors crowd them out. Today, park caretakers carefully try to recreate these conditions through prescribed burns. A year ago, we had fire right where I'm sitting. And this year, this whole hillside is covered with young sequoias. So one fire created the opportunity for billions of these seeds to germinate. Probably one will survive, but it will require more and more fires to keep it healthy. A lot of misconceptions about sequoias continue even to this day. Contrary to some accounts, sequoias are not immune to fire. In fact, shattered sequoia wood burns readily. Almost all mature sequoias show signs of repeated burning, like these two sequoias here. Why do you think they both have burns on the uphill side of the trunks? Logs roll downhill, collect on the uphill side of a tree, and when fires come through at regular intervals, where you have the logs, that's where it will burn the hottest and the longest every single time you have a fire. And eventually, the fire will eat through the bark and get to the heartwood of the tree. Look at the fire scar in that tree. That's a great example of how sequoias are resilient when fire comes through. The bark will eventually heal over that wound, and over time, you may not know a scar was even there. We're only about 100 feet from the top of this slope, and just up there are giant sequoia trees again. So why are there sequoias there, but not here? Well, it has to do with the lay of the land. As we are on the east face of this slope, and as the moisture-laden air blows in from the valley, it rises and dumps most of its moisture on the west side. So it's wetter over there, you have more sequoias. It's drier over here, you have chaparral. Here at the top of the mountain, we have reached the Sugar Bowl Grove, one of the most amazing sights you'll ever see. Right around me are at least 50 individual trees. This is as close as you can get to a pure, dense stand of giant sequoias. Some people have actually speculated that this area right here has more wood on it than any 1 acre in the world. Thanks to research done in Redwood Canyon, we know now a lot more about insects and tiny animals and how they interact with these trees. In late summer and autumn, especially on warm days with a breeze, sequoia seeds continually flutter to the ground. The rain of seeds is caused by a tiny beetle that lays its eggs in the cones. As the long-horned wood-boring beetle larvae tunnel their way in through the rich carbohydrates in the cone flesh, they cause the cone to dry out gradually and release its seeds. Natural fire opens up the canopy and allows for a profusion of wildflowers. Forests regularly disturbed by fire in turn develop a wide variety of healthy habitats. Open fields, meadows, young forests, and mature forests. A wider variety of animals live in healthy forests. Well, thank you for coming on this hike with me through Redwood Canyon. We have seen how giant sequoias are beautifully adapted to the sunny, well-watered canyons that they find in the western Sierra Nevada. We've also seen how they are adapted to frequent fires, how they not only are adapted, they take advantage of these frequent fires to reproduce. When caretakers removed fire from this ecosystem, we really thought that we were protecting the trees. But in fact, we were protecting them so thoroughly that they were unable to reproduce. We simply did not understand how crucial fire is to the health of this ecosystem. But now, after a century of sequoia research, we are able to see both the trees and the forest that gives them life. If you want to learn more about the challenge of protecting these big trees, why not go to a visitor center and talk to a ranger? But better yet, go on a hike for yourself and experience the magic and mystery of one of the largest groves of giant sequoias. Have a good day.
You